Hey everyone, I think we're about ready to get started. My name is Neil. I'm the chair of Cupertino for All. And I just want to first start by talking a little bit about myself and also our organization. I am originally from Cupertino. I live here currently as well. I went through the schooling system at CUSD. I went to Eaton Elementary from 2nd until 5th grade. I went to Lawson Middle School from 6th until 8th grade. I went to Cupertino High School for all 4 years. And then I also went to De Anza College for 2 years as well. And then I transferred to Berkeley. I did some brief time in DC. It wasn't really for me. And so I moved back here to Cupertino. And a big piece of that was because I wanted to see myself as part of this community. And I wanted to make sure that the place that I grew up with was still conducive of all the great things that we've come to love about Cupertino. Our schools, our inclusivity, things that are definitely in danger right now. And so the purpose of this today is we just want to talk about some things that we can do, some actions we can do to change that, and also to learn a little bit about what's going on. And we have some amazing panelists here today, and you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. We'll get more to that in a bit. A little bit about Cupertino for All. Cupertino for All is a progressive coalition made up of longtime residents, displaced residents, students, parents, homeowners, renters, and our allies. And what brings us together is we have a commonly shared belief that we can and we should create a more sustainable Cupertino for future generations. It is our responsibility to do so, to make sure that future families can live here and appreciate all the great things about our city just like we were able to. We recognize that our city, as well as the Bay Area, has pursued decades of exclusionary policies, preventing many families from being able to move into our town. But we also believe that there is a path forward that is advantageous for us current residents and also for future residents as well. With certain policy recommendations, Cupertino can become more accessible and more vibrant, and our children can realistically have somewhere to live in the future as well here. Our values are compassion, respect, and empathy, socioeconomic justice, diversity and inclusion. We believe housing is a human right, and we also believe in democracy and good governance, environmental sustainability, and protecting renters as well. So on that note, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. So Alyssa, you can go ahead and talk a little about yourself, and Alyssa is going to help me out with the program here today.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out, so to speak, and helping inaugurate the new normal and how we can come together as a community and talk about the issues that impact all of us every day and will continue on to the future. Briefly, my name is Alyssa Cisneros. I am on the board of Cupertino for All, and I came to that position because currently I'm also on the De Anza Commission, where I provide strategic support to the president of De Anza College, and I am also a displaced resident. My family moved when I was in the 3rd grade to Cupertino exactly because the schools were great, and they wanted my siblings and I to have the best possible education outcomes. And over time, the city continued to grow, and we got pushed out as renters, long story short. And I now live in Sunnyvale, where I recently announced that I am running for city council. So these are all issues that I care deeply about, and I hope to serve not just in city council, but continue to work with our community and all of you. And I look forward to the conversations that we'll be having today. Neil, I think you're on mute.
My bad. If we can go ahead and go to the slide on program overview, we're just going to talk about what today is going to look like. And we'll try to make our best effort to make sure that we have as much time as possible for all of you to ask your questions as well. So we're about to move into opening remarks from Supervisor Dave Cortese, who has decided to join us, and we are very grateful for that. Dave Cortese is on the Board of Supervisors for the county. We'll be talking about the problem at hand today and what we hope to achieve. And then we'll go into our first panel, which is Voices of Our Schools, where we'll have Judy Miner from Foothill De Anza, and we'll have Lorian Cunningham from CUSD and Polly Bowe from FUHSD. Then I'll move on to a quick panel, which is Message from Our Youth, which will be youth members of the community who are either currently in the school system or have recently been in our school system. And then we'll have panel 3, which is how we can go toward more inclusive schools and housing through new policies. And if time permits for any of the panels, we'll also have audience questions as well. At the very end, We will have roughly 15 to 20 minutes to just talk as a community. We'll allow all of you to raise your hands, and then we'll call on folks just to make comment and tell us what you thought. So without further ado, can go ahead and go into Dave.
Muted, huh?
There you go.
Am I unmuted now?
You're good. You're good.
Thank you very much. You know, it's amazing. I was thinking about this morning. I could probably write a book on all the new phraseology that I'm using multiple times a day now that I wasn't using as recently as 2 months ago. Like, please unmute, or am I muted, or whatever. There's a whole bunch of it. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here and honored to be here to help kick off this discussion today. What a great group of people, great panelists and participants here whom I recognize from my work, in some cases over the years, that has ranged from public education in 8 years that I spent on the East Side High School Board, 1992 through 2000. Another years on the San Jose City Council, where, as most people here know, at the municipal level, you're dealing sometimes almost exclusively in land use on a vote-by-vote basis. And of course, now on the Board of Supervisors, where I'm in my 12th year, in my final year, we're limited to 3 4-year terms on the Board of Supervisors. And of course, the county is still involved in land use and in housing production issues and in the outcomes and consequences of not having adequate housing, including the 8,000 unsheltered unhoused folks we have at this time, and nearly 10,000 overall homeless that we have. The need is so great in terms of where we go from here, and it's so important to be doing this even in the middle of a pandemic. And I would venture to say it's important because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and because everyone is so focused, and rightfully so, on the health crisis and how to respond to that, and how to even temporarily at least modify some of the rules of engagement for society, how we do things on a day-to-day basis. While all that's going on, we can't lose sight of the fact that we are still in the middle of a declared housing crisis, a declared homelessness crisis, that in this county, nearly 160 people died for lack of shelter on the streets last year. To put that in perspective, although the tragedy of COVID is not to be understated by any means, the tragedy of death on the streets is not to be understated either. And this is important for all of you, all of us, to somehow manage to keep these major and significant priorities and work that we've done, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, where I think from a legislative level and a local government level, there's been finally the focus that we've wanted and that so many of us have worked for, in terms of addressing the housing crisis, in terms of balancing the needs for protections, renters protections, and other protections with the basic need for production, and perhaps streamline rules to make sure that those who are on the extremes, those who would use obstructionism or delay tactics or litigation to get in the way of ordinary land use planning, aren't the victors, and those who would try to dispense with local control and community input aren't the victors either. The fact of the matter is, we've got to bring people together, just like we are in the health crisis right now, to address what is an existential question, and literally so. Where are our children going to live? Where are their children going to live? The basic affordability in this valley, and how are our seniors going to survive on fixed incomes with the increasing cost of housing, the lack of housing, and in some cases, the inability to even find a new place to live if you're so unlucky as to to have your lease or rental agreement come due without a willing landlord to renew. So I want you to know that in the work that I'm doing currently at the county and the work that I've done at the regional level with the Association of Bay Area Governments and with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, where I served on the CASA steering committee, which was intended, to quote unquote blow up the boxes and try to bring to bear some new thinking in terms of where we might go in the future. That I've been immersed in these issues, and there's no way that I can accept those extremes that I just talked about, one extreme or the other. I think what has to happen is we need to rededicate ourselves to a new normal in terms of housing as well. How are we going to get it done? How are we going to get it done in time? And how are we going to get it done in a way that doesn't violate basic community values? One of the things that came out of CASA, which is important, which has been discussed and debated as recently as yesterday at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and a few days ago at the Association of Bay Area Governments Executive Committee, is the product of a bill that Assemblymember David Chu introduced that was signed into law, Assembly Bill 1487, which authorizes a regional finance agency, a regional authority whose sole purpose would be to create the leverage, the investment capital to match up with private sector investment, nonprofit housing investment, and even municipal investment to spur housing production in the right places, of course, and in the right quantities to meet our regional housing needs analysis, and at the right income levels as well. And the beauty about where that was going before the pandemic hit and started to get into the minds of the voters was it was headed toward a potential bond issue, much like we did here in Santa Clara County in 2016 with Measure A, at the regional level, basically a mega bond that wouldn't solely be used for permanent supportive housing for the homeless like we did here in Santa Clara County, but would be broadly used to spur housing and be available to cities and counties throughout the 9-county Bay Area region. Unfortunately, the polling for that measure is failing, if you will, from an empirical basis. I mean, the pollsters have made that public. This week, the agencies decided to postpone any effort to put a measure like that on the ballot this November, but to hold the promise of putting one on the ballot in the future because it's a good idea. So what happens to that agency in the meanwhile? Is it stood up? Does it become a housing authority on the regional level? And if so, if you're not going to fund it with a bond issue, what does it do? Where does it get its money? And one of the things I suggested, and it seems to have a little bit of momentum with my colleagues and with the combined planning staff of the MTC and the Association of Bay Area Governments, is that a belief that I have that the largest counties in this region, particularly Santa Clara County, Alameda County, and perhaps San Francisco and or San Mateo, can contribute surplus land or land in kind to seed the initial investment portfolio of this housing authority so that it now has some assets that it can go out and seek private sector partners, again, or nonprofit partners, or even municipal partners to start to put together joint venture housing proposals. It's something that was done in New York City years ago when that city was struggling in a deep recession like we'll be facing now. The city said, let's stand up a finance authority. Let's give them some of this land that is basically going nowhere. That's general plan for housing, and let's see what they can do with it. Let's get government out of the way a little bit, and let's see what they can do in terms of matching up partners and building the community coalitions to get housing done. That is now a multi-billion-dollar housing authority that is responsible for most of the housing production in New York City, particularly on the affordable side. So there's hope. There's hope at the regional level. We have to be innovative. That's what we're good at, not just in technology, but we're good at innovating on public policy too here in this region. And your group, this group, on behalf of public education and everybody else that needs the housing support in terms of essential services in our communities, you can innovate and you can lead and you can help us lead the way. And my pledge to you, as long as I'm in office, is to carry on good, open, productive dialogue with all of you to make sure that we don't ever stop again, we don't ever again stop advancing the cause of appropriate housing and affordable housing in our communities. Thank you again, and thank you very much for the opportunity to help kick this off today.
Thank you so much, Dave, for being here. We really appreciate it. I know you have a super busy schedule, a lot going on. And so, yeah, thank you so much. We're very grateful.
I do have to get off in a few minutes. I don't want anyone to be insulted by that, but of course they scheduled me on the next Zoom at 7 p.m. So I'm sure everyone on here knows how that goes. Thank you, though.
Okay, take care, Dave. Thank you. Before moving on, I wanted to quickly remind folks that this is part of Affordable Housing Month, which is put on by Silicon Valley at Home, which focuses on housing challenges and the solutions we are building together. It's been going on for the whole month of May, and if you're curious as to different events that have been going on during Affordable Housing Month, you can go ahead and head over to their website at Silicon Valley at Home. They have a lot of different recordings of past events, including this one will be on there as well. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our problem statement and what we hope to achieve today in this dialogue. So as we all know, if we could go to the slide for problem. We all know housing is too expensive. For years, rents have been soaring and mobility between homes has been extremely difficult. And we see the effects of that. Every day we see more and more homelessness, more and more folks getting evicted. I mean, just across the street from Velco, across the street from Apple, one of the largest and richest corporations in the world, we have a pretty sizable homeless encampment. And if you've been able to take the time to talk to any of those folks, you might be surprised that actually most of them are from the area. A good chunk of them are from Cupertino. They used to be our neighbors. They used to live down the street. A lot of them went to our schools. One of them went to Cupertino High. One of them's from Mountain View. Couple of folks from Sunnyvale. They went to our schools, they went to our districts. And so it is really important that we have this discussion today, because even though sometimes it might not feel like we're as affected as some other areas of our community, we still recognize and are affected by those costs. And then I'll hand it off to you, JR, to talk about RHNA.
Okay, all right. So every years we get a new allocation of how many homes every single jurisdiction in the state of California is supposed to be trying to produce. This document is how Cupertino is doing toward its goal thus far. If you look in the bottom right corner, you'll notice that we still have 756 homes left that need to be built just to meet our current allocation, and we've only gotten through 308. That's a pretty telling figure. When it comes to deed-restricted affordable housing, that number is far worse. You will notice that there's only 19 that we've managed to produce, and they're all for very low income. They were all in one project, the Veranda. Kathy Robinson later on in our third panel will get to speak to that point. The moderate numbers that you see there, those are all accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units, those are simply granny flats. You might know them by that name. They're things that the current council, unfortunately, has fought to try to prevent. So you can see that these are an important figure in the production that we've managed to reach thus far. Next slide. Can I see the next slide?
I think Rachel might be having some tech difficulties.
Sure. All right, so just to give some additional context, then what does this mean for what we're seeing in the schools? On the next slide, when we get to it, will be the enrollment figures for the Cupertino Union School District from 2010 until 2019. And they look fairly stable until about 2014. Then they start to fall, and that fall becomes ever more deleterious. In the following slide, if we can have it, when we get to it, you will see that we continue that in projection. We expect to lose by the end of the 24-25 academic year almost 5,000 students from the Cupertino Union School District. That has knock-on effects for the future of the Fremont Union High School District, which is expected by the end of 2024 to reach about 9,600 students, which is over 1,000 students fewer than what it currently has. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Neil.
Hey everyone, sorry about the tech difficulties. We're not sure what's going on, but I just put the PowerPoint in the chat. So if you want to go ahead and look at the visuals that we're using and we're struggling a bit with, you can go ahead and take a look at that. Just to kind of restate some of the stuff that JR said, because it's kind of hard to conceptualize it without looking at the figures. For our school districts, we're seeing projected enrollment decline. And that also, in terms of housing development, we currently have 0 units in the pipeline, and we're expected to get thousands. So it's definitely very concerning, and we need to make sure that we have a plan moving forward. Great. So how does this impact us? I'm not sure currently, but it definitely does have an impact on us. Housing costs are high, few families can move in. CUSD's funding is tied to enrollment. So essentially, if we're losing enrollment, that also means that our district is losing money. And that represents a potential financial crisis, especially when you compound it with the fact that we have COVID-19 budgetary related issues. And I'm sure that Lorianne and others will talk more about this, but it's certainly going to be a huge issue in the coming years. Difficulty in transit infrastructure, because in Cupertino, we don't have a lot of particularly density, despite growing demand in the region. There isn't a huge incentive for agencies like VTA to build public transit infrastructure in our city. And so what that means is we're going to increasingly and continue to be reliant on cars as a form of transportation, while many other parts of the Bay Area will have more public transit infrastructure invested. We're also going to see, as we already see now, youth are not moving back to Cupertino. You know, as someone who's 23 years old and graduated recently, I don't know a lot of people moving back. That's going to lead to an aging community. And it's going to lead to a dwindling of our community as well. And as well as a rise in homelessness, and seniors are having difficulty as well in choosing how they can possibly downsize and move elsewhere. So our goals for today, next slide, keep it real quick. We want to inform the community about critical issues involving housing in our schools, build relationships with all of you to make us all better connected, to build that stronger sense of community like we all deserve. Allow participation from all of you to get a conversation going. And I just wanted to remind you all, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them later. And also to brainstorm ways that we can solve our crisis too. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dolly and JR, who are going to moderate our first panel, Panel 1, Voices of Our Schools.
Great, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to give Dave, even though he had to go to another meeting, Dave Cortesia, attaboy today, because he really has been the proponent on the Board of Supervisors, along with Cindy Chavez and the others are following, to make sure that there are tiny houses available, to see that affordable housing policies are passed and implemented. And he was active in that bond measure that Santa Clara County passed recently for affordable housing. So he's really done an awesome job as a leader in this arena. I'm super excited to introduce and co-host the first panel this evening. We have Lorian Cunningham with CUSD, Polly Bovey, who represents the Fremont Union High School District, and our chancellor at the Foothill De Anza Community College District, Judy Miner. And it just is an honor for me to work with such wonderful educators. So, ladies, what I'd like you to do, if you want to take a moment, is briefly introduce yourself and tell the audience here this evening why you're with us tonight.
You want me to go first, Dolly? So I'm Lori Cunningham. I am currently serving on the Board of Trustees for Cupertino Union School District. I am currently serving as our board president. I grew up here. I went to our Cupertino Union and Fremont Union High School District schools. I'm a proud graduate of Homestead High School and attended West Valley Elementary and Cupertino Middle School now. It was a junior high school at the time I went. And so came back here to raise my own family and have been really involved in our schools for many years now. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. You know, I'm one of the rare ones that was able to actually come back here and make a home here. Many of my friends were not able to, and I don't take that for granted at all. It is really just a product of meeting and marrying somebody who was in the tech sector and you know, between the two of us being able to make it work. You know, I'm also very aware of wanting opportunities for my own kids and the kids of my heart that are going through our local districts here. So.
Thanks, Lori. My claim to fame is that in 1989, Lori was at Homestead High School, and she was one of my students as I was an assistant principal there in my first year in being in the district. So I have been with the district for a long time and appreciated the opportunity to be part of this community. It is an amazing community, and I think that's part of what we don't want to lose. I think that's what we're hearing here. The diversity in terms of every aspect of this community is something we want to continue. We want it to be vibrant. And I'm grateful to be here tonight and very grateful to be representing our high school district and helpful in any way I can in this endeavor. So thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Judy Miner, the Chancellor of the Foothill De Anza Community College District. It really is an honor to be on a panel with two amazing women leaders and the rest of you who will follow in the subsequent panels tonight. I've been a community college educator and administrator since 1979 when I first became Dean of Admissions and Records at City College of San Francisco. And it's been my privilege to be an administrator for the Foothill De Anza Community College District for 32 years. My first 19 were at De Anza in a variety of positions. My last 9 years there as the Vice President of Instruction. And then I was very fortunate to become president of Foothill College for 8 years. And for the past 5 years, I've been serving as the Chancellor. So at the risk of it sounding like I can't keep a job, I do love the district, and again, I feel so blessed to have had so many opportunities to serve in so many ways. Thanks again for including me tonight.
Great, thank you. And I think we can take the slide off now and focus on the panelists so that people can actually see the live person who's speaking. I think that would be great. JR?
Sure, so we'll start off with a simple question that will go through all of you. First, can you describe the enrollment trends that you see in your district, where those trends are predicted to go in the next several years? And for your respective districts, what are some factors behind those trends? So we'll start with Lorianne.
Okay, sure. So I did put a slide into the deck, which people can refer back to, but essentially, you know, our district had a birth bubble, if you will, that came through. Babies born between roughly 2000, 2005. And that bubble moved all the way through all of our grades at our school district. And started moving on into our high school district. And so, our enrollment was actually growing until 2013-14. We peaked out up around 19,000 students. And subsequently, as those 8th grade classes have graduated out or promoted out of our middle schools and moved on to our high schools, the incoming classes in our kindergarten were smaller. And so that put us into a declining enrollment state. But what has happened on the back end of our curve is essentially that we are sort of even outpacing our demographers' predictions as to how fast our enrollment has been declining. And so over time, you look at, was it just a matter of the birth cohort moving through, or is there another factor here? And I think, it's pretty widely accepted at this point that as, the recovery from the Great Recession happened and as the real estate market exploded here, that in general, we did have fewer younger families moving in and fewer younger families enrolling in our schools. It's not at all uncommon for us to have students joining us for the first time at 3rd or 4th or 5th grade rather than starting with us as kindergartners and moving through, because that's when their families are able to make that transition, in. Maybe it's a second home or a third home, not their first starter home that they're buying in with. In the other slide that's in the deck, there's a sort of a 10-year capture that looks at 5 years ago and then current and 5 years moving out. And you'll see that, all told from our peak, we're slated to lose about 4,800 students. We still have about another 2,400 to go here in the next 5 years until 24, 25. So, and as I said, each subsequent year, what we're seeing is that we're actually sort of outpacing what the predictions are in terms of how fast we're losing students. So we are anticipating a drop again next year. It's probably going to be bigger than what our demographer predicted even as recently as last October.
So obviously, because we inherit the Cupertino Union School District students, our trend is very similar. We were at a peak. We do have a substantial portion of our population that also comes from Sunnyvale, and the number of enrollment drops there are less than in Cupertino. Perhaps because there's more multiple family dwellings and opportunities for students to move into that area. I suspect that's the case. We do see more student generation rate in those units than we have in the past. Not much, a tiny uptick, but some. So we are seeing a decline. It's an uneven decline. So as many of you may know, 4 years ago, almost 4.5 years ago now, we had to start addressing a decline in enrollment at Lynbrook High School in that end of our district. And that's not surprising. It's a very small population that feeds that school. The boundaries are quite small, almost all single family homes. And there's a great many people that are continuing to own those homes long after their students have left our district and Cupertino Union. So we are seeing a decline there. We do have a strategy now where parents are opting to send their child there as opposed to Cupertino High School. And so we're creating some balance that is working pretty well for now, but we're also seeing some substantial decline at Monte Vista High School. Let's put it in perspective. They lost the equivalent of 7 teachers worth of sections for between last year, the year we're in now, and for next year. So we've had many of the teachers, the wonderful teachers at Monte Vista, move to other schools in our district. We're glad to still have them in the district, but those kinds of declines are being managed internally, and so far we're okay. But it's something we have to watch carefully because it's not just the decline, it's the uneven decline. And I think one of the things everyone is representing here is schools that provide a great variety and depth of coursework for students that have an incredible number of interests. And that's why we try to maintain a certain level of enrollment in each of our high schools so that we can continue to offer the variety of courses that we have. So it's not just a decline in enrollment, it's a balance, and we'd like to keep that balance going so all of our schools can be as robust as they are right now.
Well, for Foothill De Anza, this current academic year actually saw a flattening of the downward trend that we had begun in the year of the Great Recession, 2008. And that was also a time when there was a severe drop in state funding, and they actually forced down, if you will, the number of sections that we might offer by 8%. There were other changes at the state level too that caused our enrollments to drop. Many of you may remember the very robust lifelong learning offerings that we used to have in physical education, in the arts. And there was such a push that the community colleges should really be focusing primarily on transfer and workforce preparation. And the community education portion of community colleges was really kind of defunded as a result of the policy changes that went on. Repeatability got in the way of many people continuing to take classes with us. And certainly as the economy picked up, more people were going to work and not choosing to go to school. And so we had that typical pattern that we have all faced up and down in the state of California with our community colleges, that when employment is good, our enrollments go down, and when employment is bad, our enrollments go up. So we are now expecting that both in the summer quarter and in the upcoming fall, that we are likely to have much, much more demand than we can possibly meet because of the decreases in the funding that we will be getting from the state. And even looking at a deficit factor that will go back for the 1920 fiscal year, taking some funding away from us, even though we've already spent the money that we thought we were getting from the state. The wait lists that we are already showing at De Anza for the summer session, which doesn't even begin for another month, is really unusual for us for this time of year. And when we compare the enrollments at this point to last year's, De Anza's head count is up by 26.8%, which is almost 1,700 more students than last year at this time. That's with only the addition of 15 more sections than had been offered last summer. And in terms of full-time equivalent students, that's 432. So again, with one more month to go, we're absolutely certain that we probably will be at capacity during the summer session. And that is all online with the exception of our allied health programs that do need some labs. For the fall, both of our colleges will have a choice for students of either totally online classes or courses that will have some portion in person, but would have to be ready to go online should we get another shelter in place or some kind of a surge that would suggest that we need to close down our buildings. So again, we're expecting a lot of students in the fall. You all know the incredible quality of both our colleges, and as students may be comparing prices between going to UC and CSU totally online or doing totally online at Foothill and De Anza, we think we know where they're going to make the choices.
Thank you all for your insightful answers there. I too, like Lorianne, am a product of the Cupertino Elementary School District, the Fremont Union High School District, and also I attended both Foothill and De Anza College. I'm a current teacher. I'm a math teacher, high school math teacher. And like many of us in the community, whether you're parents, students, or friends of parents or students or teachers, it's a challenging time. Lorianne, I want to ask the next question specifically to you, and it has to do with this dropping enrollment and people in this neighborhood being concerned about any school closures that might occur. And if you do hear birds chirping in the background, they only come on when I'm doing my Google Meets with my students, and most of the time they're silent. So just enjoy the environment, please. But Lorianne, if you could talk to us about school closures and the district's financial situation and how you see that coming about in the next couple of years, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Make sure I'm not muted here. Yeah, so essentially, I do want to preface by saying, you know, I'm in a little bit of a different position than either Judy or Polly, just because I am a trustee. I'm one of 5, right? So I make decisions with my board team. We all have an equal vote and an equal say, and we are in the midst of some really tough conversations right now around some of the issues that you're raising, Dolly, both our budget and the fact that there is, you know, I think growing awareness in the community that school closures may in fact be a part of addressing that issue. But I want to get to as much of your question as I can because it's a whopper. We have to go wide and look up at the state level to understand sort of what's going on with our budget and how that sort of interplays with the factors here regionally and locally in order to understand why school closures would even be on the table for us right now, because it's not only a product of our enrollment. And so, I always like to start with the fact that to remind people that CUSD is actually the largest K-8 school district in Northern California. We are big for a K-8 school district. And in fact, most of the K-8 school districts that are here regionally, even in our county, are, we're 2, 3, 4 times as big as most of the other K-8 school districts. Combined with that, we are also one of the very lowest funded districts in the entire state of California. All school districts are funded based on a universal funding formula that gets applied to all. In our case, that's all the funding that we get. And there's always winners and losers in funding formulas, and the way that our funding formula works out, we are the losers of the losers. We're actually in the bottom 10 of districts that are LCFF funded in the state. And in addition to that, what makes us so unique is that combined with being at the very lowest end of the funding bracket, we also operate here in the heart of Silicon Valley, where a part of this conversation tonight is the exploding costs and just how expensive it is to operate here. And so that funding formula that we're funded on does not include any sort of regional cost index. There is no adjustment made to the funding formula for where you operate. And I do always want to reflect on the fact, and I think it's very much in line with the values that you started out with tonight, that on the whole, the funding formula is actually a really positive step forward for California, right? It looks at funding through an equity-based lens, which is incredibly important. Our students who come to us with our most challenges, our students who are coming from our low socioeconomic status, our students that are learning English in our schools for the first time, our students that are in our least stable family situations, part of our foster youth, and our houseless students are all students for which the state correctly identifies concentrating funds on. But we do not have a high portion of those students here in Cupertino. And that puts us at the very lowest end, but it's not to say we don't have any of those students that we need dollars for. And we also need to be funded in a way that provides for basic operational sufficiency for us, which we are not. And so I often say that if a dollar doesn't go as far here as it goes in other parts of the state, then that's not an equitable dollar for kids. And so that is sort of the crux of our problem here. It's all tied together. We have this chronic severe underfunding, being one of the lowest funded in the state, layered in with our escalating costs here regionally, and then that steep enrollment decline. And so it's the interplay of all those things together that really has landed us in the situation that we're in. As a district, we're in our 6th straight year of budget cuts. We've cut more than $10 million out of our district budget in the last 3 years alone. We just finished cutting another $3.5 million this past March as we were entering COVID. And then we got stuck with, sort of all of the costs that all districts have experienced associated with, sort of entering into COVID and unbudgeted expenses. And now the state is being, is faced with what is being called the largest deficit in state history. And so the governor is proposing a 10% further cut across the board to K-12 education, which, if we're already the very lowest funded, then you're dropping our funding another 10% after that. It's catastrophic for us. It's created another $11 to $15 million hole in our budget that we must solve for. So that sets the stage for where we are now. We've known for some time that our budget was precarious because of the extremely low funding, and it was going to necessitate some tough conversations for us anyway because of what was going on in pockets of our district. Much like Polly described for FUHSD, our enrollment is unbalanced throughout the district, and it's happening, the loss of students is happening in some concentrated pockets. So we knew we were going to have some tough conversations anyway, but now with COVID and the Great Recession sort of on steroids, if you will, that we're expecting here, we can't print money. We legally must balance a budget. And so the question is not, will which drastic lever we pull, it's how many drastic levers we now have to pull to balance this huge hole that we have in our budget. So school closures are definitely on the table, but as are things like furlough days and increasing class sizes, combining principals between school sites, and further cuts than we've already made in the last couple years with, just major cuts across all of our departments and our services. We are already running as lean as we can. We're running in the bottom 5% for our administrative overhead in the county right now as far as school districts go.
Lorianne?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we, I think we might need to wrap on this.
Okay. Yeah. So we are already, running super lean, and, we don't have anywhere left to cut really, but some of these major levers. And so, to wrap to your question about closing schools, if you only look at our enrollment numbers and combine it with all of those budgetary factors, we are in a position where our board is having to consider not if, but probably how many. If you just look at the numbers for our enrollment and sort of the idea of what are right size schools for us, balancing both equity across the district as well as providing learning opportunities and being within our fiscal means, then we're probably looking at something like 3 to 7. My gut tells me we won't end up at that 7 number, but do I think there's a very real possibility that as we move through all of the discussions and deliberations we have to make, that we end up at 3 or more? Yeah, I do. I think that's our financial reality right now.
JR?
All right, so this question is for Polly. FUHSD has a different funding mechanism. It's a basic aid district. And it breaks my heart what's going on at Lynbrook, if only because I'm an alumnus of Lynbrook, so it speaks to me personally to hear that it's going back into a situation of potentially having to cut classes. Can you tell us how declining school enrollment impacts instructional quality and educational opportunity in your high schools?
Well, I'm going to just do a 2-second version of the difference in the funding because I think it's inherently confusing. And let me just say that nobody chooses which kind of funding they have in the state of California. Sometimes our funding is called basic aid, but more typically it's called community funded. It's called community funded because if you look at the money that the state would give us, we actually have more dollars in our portion of property tax than we would get from the state. Now, we don't have a great deal more. We're often what I call BBA, barely basic aid, but we'll take every dollar that we get because, like Lori, it takes dollars to educate kids, and that's what's important. So I appreciate that. And because we have a broader area that we pull students from, that's what allows us to be basic aid. That's the difference. If we were just pulling from Cupertino, we would be looking at a very similar issue to what they're facing, and we want to do whatever we can to support them. So as I said earlier, we believe in comprehensive high schools. Even during the various downturns that we've experienced, we did not want to cut music or guidance counselors or art or libraries. And all our teachers within the district, as well as our families, have helped us tighten our belt whenever these situations come along. We have a formula base in terms of our negotiations with teachers, which allow us to do that. And at times, if necessary, people will take pay cuts from the superintendent to everyone within the system so that we can keep schools going. Right now, we're not seeing an effect on program. We are going to have a reduction of the 10% of the dollars we do get from the state. And we'll get other additional cuts as well around career and technical education programs and some of the other things that are being considered for cuts. But the program right now, if we do the types of things we know how to do so well when problems come up, we're going to be able to maintain our comprehensive high schools as we have. So that means we stop sending, although there would be no conferences to go to right now anyway, but we stopped sending teachers to conferences or anyone to conferences. But we just look carefully at every dollar as we're spending it. And we believe we'll be able to maintain programs as we have in the past, at least for now. It's hard to know how to predict what the financial situation is going to be in the future. But Our funding is constant. It's not related to how many students we have. We have the same number of dollars coming in no matter how many students we have. So actually declining enrollment helps us with a few more dollars per student than we have when we have more robust enrollment. So we're either going to be at level or in a slightly better situation if we have a declining enrollment. So it's a little contrary. And again, Cupertino didn't choose to be the funding model they have any more than we chose to be our funding model. We're just fortunate enough that the calculation gives us those extra dollars. So I think that we think of our keeping our program and classes. So when you said cutting classes at Lynbrook, that's why we changed the enrollment process. So we didn't have to do that because we really feel strongly that comprehensive high schools have to be our priority if we can.
Great, thank you. Judy, I have a question for you. I understand that Foothill De Anza, Fremont Union High School District, and Cupertino Elementary School District are all creating a JPA. And I think that JPA may have to do with housing for students. And so can you explain to us, to the audience, really what a JPA is and how you see it working on behalf of both the 3 school districts as well as residents and students?
Well, thank you. And in the interest of time, because I know Neil's been watching the clock, I will give you a very short answer. We've just formed the Joint Powers Authority, and I very much want to thank my colleagues, particularly Polly at Fremont Union and at Cupertino Union and Sunnyvale Union, because they had already been working on this in order to provide housing for their teachers and their staff. And as we were looking at our own needs for Foothill De Anza, I actually asked Polly if we could crash that party. And she said, of course, and we got the go-ahead from Lori and folks at Sunnyvale as well. So the opportunity for us to work as a group of 4 districts brings, if you will, a kind of purchasing power, a kind of convening power that could really make a difference for a certain amount of scale. And of course, I want to thank everybody who voted for Measure G in the March election, because with us having access to $898 million, this is really huge for us in terms of not only employee housing, but student housing, and our great interest in using partnerships of this type that are brand new for us. So it's definitely a learning journey for probably all of us. And I think we may be the first to ever have a community college as part of a JPA with the other school districts, because we're governed by so many different kinds of regulations. But so far so good. And there's even been some discussion about whether or not there could be childcare services that could be a part of this. We're particularly interested because of the outstanding program that we have at De Anza, which over the years really had to move away from serving our students and our employees because of the need to cover the costs. And so without doing a lot of market rate spaces in the Child Development Center, we just couldn't have kept it open. So if there's some opportunities as a result of this partnership to solve some of the greatest needs for our employees collectively, we're pretty excited about what that could mean for all of us.
Well, we're excited that you all are here tonight. GR, do we have time for a quick question?
I think we have a quick moment for at least one question.
Thank you.
From the audience. The one that's come in is from a licensed psychologist asking the following. It's well documented that insecure housing situations lead to poor educational and career outcomes, as well as poor mental health outcomes. With these in mind, I have 2 questions. How much of an impact do you see in your schools to students, faculty, and staff coming from insecure housing situations? And then 2, in what way has the COVID-19 pandemic influenced those impacts? And I'll put that to anybody who would like to try to answer it.
Oh my. I would say that, like Lori, we don't have a great many homeless youth, but there is it is incredibly tragic and difficult to imagine how you could think about going to school when you can't know where you're going to eat or where you're going to sleep. So we do see those impacts. We do everything we can to focus on those students and provide whatever we can to create more stability. In terms of our own staff, what we mostly see is that they're traveling miles and miles and miles so that they can continue to work in these schools and provide for the students that live in this community, because they can't live in large part, they can't live in this community. And one of the reasons that Judy brought up childcare is that we're trying everything we can to do the kinds of supports that would be needed to keep these high quality teachers in our schools. That's what Lori meant when she said it's an expensive place to live. We can't afford to pay them enough to live here. So we have to think of all the things that are stretching their budgets and ways to create opportunities to mitigate that so that they do feel secure and they can focus on what they want to do and what they love to do, which is serve the kids of this community. So that's the way I'd answer that.
I might add that our Board of Trustees, when they adopted their goals for the 2020 calendar year, put at the top of their list attention to students' needs around hunger, housing, and health, specifically mental health. So that was kind of our 3H agenda for this year, knowing that all those factors come together. And even though people might say, oh, but please, you're an educational institution, why would you have to worry about that? That's a part of making it possible for students to attend and to be successful. So we know that we do have to pay attention to that first level of Maslow's hierarchy in order to make sure that our students really are able to be able to come to us and finish. And so we have food pantries and we have housing assistance. And we are looking to expand mental health services, because even though both campuses have psychological services, the stressors for our students continue to increase. And so we want to be there in as many ways as we possibly can, and obviously calling upon the resources that are in the community and making those connections for them.
I just will add, since the COVID-19 was added to that, we have the privilege of serving meals to roughly 3,000 people in this community every day. We are actually serving 3 days a week, but every time we serve, we give 2 days of meals. We've done that throughout. It started at about 1,000. It's moved to almost 3,000. So I think that gives you some perspective on the effect of COVID-19 on our situation here in our community.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think West Valley Community Services and Main Street Cupertino have been huge partners with you in that endeavor. And we appreciate that. I know as a teacher, I appreciate students getting fed, because while it may look like we're not in school, we're still in school. So thank you all for this part of our evening. We are going to turn, I think, to session number 2, so we don't run too far behind. Thanks, ladies. You're doing a great job representing our school and community college district. And on behalf of all the other attendees this evening, I think they would all give you a round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
If you happen to ask a question in the Q&A, we'll see if we can try to get to it at a later panel or during the open discussion at the end. Thank you if you participated.
So for this portion, we're just going to have, as I said, some members of the community who have recently been in the school system or are currently in the school system talk about their experiences and why they're here, things that they're concerned about related to our schools and housing. So I'll start us off. Like I said, I went to every level of schooling that we have here, besides, I suppose, preschool and kindergarten. But I was here for K through 12, and I was also here for community college. I ended up not going to a 4-year school because of money and mental health issues. I ended up essentially canceling my SIR and going to De Anza. It's a great decision for me, but it also, to me, illuminated really this whole other world that is a little bit concerning. And that is, a lot of our low-income students in Cupertino are commuting extremely far distances to go to De Anza, and they have no way of accessing our K through 12 schools as well. and that we've essentially created socioeconomically very segregated communities. If you just set foot on De Anza's campus, you'll immediately note how different the student demographics are from our current city. And many of these students commute 1 to 2 hours, sometimes even. Another thing that really concerns me is that a lot of my peers don't move back. So I think for Cupertino's future, it relies on students like myself, former students, coming back, starting a family, and building something here, a sense of community. But that's made extremely difficult by the fact that rent is $3,000–$4,000, a home is $2 million. There really isn't an opportunity for you to come back and start a family. Frankly, as well, I think there's a question of like, do a lot of young folks want to move back too? Because we've been a little bit reluctant to introduce certain amenities that young people tend to like, transit, for example. And so I'm a little bit concerned about the future of Cupertino as a young person, and most of my peers are my same age group are as well. And with that, I'll hand it off to Justin.
Okay, thank you. I'm unmuted. Okay. All right, hello, my name is Justin, and I'm a graduating senior from Cupertino High School. And I want to briefly discuss kind of the unintentional message Cupertino is sending to us high school students through our policy and housing situation. So I got into housing and education from researching Valco for a school project, and since then I've gotten into contact with NEO to further examine what is going on with housing in our area and how that relates to our school districts. So something this has brought me to the attention of is the fact that we high school students aren't going to be able to come back to Cupertino after we leave. The housing crisis simply doesn't allow that. It's not something people think a lot about because it is already so ingrained in our head that we're not expected to be back here. But what about people that do want to come back and contribute to the city that made them and raise his family here, right? What do we tell them? I've talked about these issues to my fellow high school students before, and I can still remember what one of my friends said. He told me that before, he just thought he'll have to leave after high school, and no big deal, right? But then after just thinking a little bit more, wouldn't it be nice if we can come back here? Because I think what Cupertino is doing right now is kind of producing a whole generation of students that don't have a hometown to return to. I think this also explains why solo students engage with these local problems. I mean, I only knew about all this after doing a school project. I think it's because that we can't even identify with the community that raised us, right? We have to just see Cupertino as a temporary launch pad to get you somewhere else. So I think if we don't take drastic measures to address these problems, yeah, sure, Cupertino get to look the same, but I think we're pushing away all the people that make Cupertino. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Genevieve Kolar and I'm a graduating student at De Anza College, class of 2020. And I've also represented De Anza College's student body on our board of trustees for the past year. I really resonate with what Justin said, and I didn't go to high school here, but a lot of students at De Anza, including the ones who are from the area, which is most of them, really resonate with that experience of trying to love Cupertino and it just won't love you back. Like, there's no opportunity for you to come back here, and it's really expected that you just pass through. I mean, you have an amazing experience at De Anza, but just because it's impossible to afford to live here, it's impossible to come back. So I even tried to come and live near college because I'm glad somebody brought up mental health. It really is difficult when you can't afford to live near school and when it's difficult to get to school because the transit isn't really very sufficient to actually focus on school and gain something from it and become the leaders that we want to see in our world. And so I tried to live in Cupertino, and I lived here very briefly until I was subjected to a no-cause eviction because my landlords wanted to raise the rent. And so after that, I lived in Sunnyvale, and now I live in Los Altos. I was fortunate to be able to live with a homeowner who has extra space. And I finally have stability, but a huge percentage of the students at De Anza, 18% over the course of a year faced homelessness, and about 56% were housing insecure. So they're moving around a ton. And when we have all of our students and our professors and our counselors and everyone stressed out, not only do we have a high rate of turnover in our staff, it just isn't conducive to a really good learning environment or to a strong sense of community. So personally, I'm transferring to a university, and I think it's really unlikely that I would ever be able to come back and live here. And that makes me really sad because I found a home here through my school, through getting involved here, through having jobs here, and I'm really gonna miss it, but I don't really have the choice. Yeah, thank you.
Neil, I think we have one question that you can entertain in the chat.
Sure. Which one is it?
I'm not quite sure, actually. I'm just seeing it on my sub chat saying, look in the Q&A.
There's a question about, it says, I run a safe parking program at a church near De Anza College. We've had some De Anza students stay with us. We love to partner with De Anza to house students who live in their cars. Is that something De Anza is considering, and is there an interest? So is it okay if I start answering that?
Certainly.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, and thank you for offering that service to students. We do have an alarming rate at which students and even our faculty members end up living in their cars. And yeah, I think there is an interest for it. And there's an interest in general. Like Cupertino City Council did allocate money to start a housing match program for situations like the one that I'm in, where there's homeowners who may have extra space and can help house students while they complete their education. Or like having portable dwelling units, which is another Silicon Valley at Home affordable housing month presentation. But I think it is something we'd be interested in, and I could definitely help you get in touch with a college. There was a bill that came up about having community colleges open their parking lots to students, and a big response was, that's a good Band-Aid, but it's hard to get in contact with those students. And a lot of times if you're living in your car, you're kind of preoccupied with trying to find a place to stay permanently, or at least to get a roof over your head. So yeah, but that sounds like an awesome program. I definitely want to learn more about it.
Thanks, Genevieve, for starting that off. I think Judy is on the line still. Judy, would you like to address us also?
Dolly and Alyssa, who are going to introduce panel 3. I just want to make sure all the folks are here.
Yeah, I think all the folks are here, but just rather quickly, Judy, I don't know if you heard that question, but it was a question from the chat room that spoke about an activist who volunteers at a church on Stevens Creek close to De Anza.
Yes, and what I can say about that is that we have wonderful resources for housing insecure students, and among them are 2 referrals to overnight parking. One is at the Winter Faith Collaborative that has been allowing our students to park overnight, as well as Prince of Peace Lutheran Church. We also have housing assistance through West Valley Community Services, through the Bill Wilson Center. There's house sharing through Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County. And there's even just some websites and some other materials in the Office of College Life for students who would be looking for housing and roommate. Additionally, because of the CARES funding that we've got, there are opportunities for students to request emergency funding, and that could help them if they have to pay first and last month rent. They might have problems with utility bills, those kinds of things. And so the combination of CARES dollars coming in, and for a number of years, we've been using foundation donations for that purpose as well. And we did start a COVID-19 emergency fund that has brought in more than $25,000 just in the last 2 months. That's been totally related to student needs around COVID, much of which is around housing and also food insecurity.
Great, thank you. I appreciate our three panelists. I mean, as we talk about housing in this area, I think it's extremely important to hear the message that Neil, Justin, and Genevieve just gave us, because they are people who would like to live in this community, who volunteer in this community, and we really do need to create solutions at really a global level for people to be able to stay in this community and afford this very expensive area. And to help us on that global level viewpoint, we have some exciting guests on panel 3. Our first is our own Assembly member, Evan Lowe, who was originally a Campbell City Councilman. Evan and I were served on our respective city councils at the same time. Our next panelist will also be Kathy Robinson, who is with Charities Housing and has a number of projects has delivered a number of projects in the realm of affordability, one here in Cupertino. And then we have 2 council members, Otto Lee, formerly from the City Council in Sunnyvale, and served as mayor, and then Rod Sinks, here, our own council member in Cupertino, who has also served as mayor. So I think that's our panelists in a nutshell. Alyssa, I'm going to give it to you. But Alyssa, if you wouldn't mind asking your question when you're unmuted. Thank you.
It can happen to anyone. I think we all know. Thank you so much, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all today. We will begin by setting the stage by first talking about how housing gets built and the tremendous difficulties that often accompany this process. This question is for Kathy Robinson. Affordable housing is a popular word to throw around, but not a single affordable home can cost near $1 million to build. For those not familiar, how does affordable housing work and how is it financed? And of course, feel free to use the Veranda project in Cupertino as kind of a stage setting backdrop for your answer if you're so inclined.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate your inviting me this evening to be part of this important panel. I'm Kathy Robinson. I work for Charities Housing, which is a nonprofit affordable housing developer. But as a little bit of background, I also went through the Cupertino schools, started at Eaton and Miller and Cupertino High School, and then left to go to college and live away from Cupertino for a while. But I was fortunate enough that when my dad, who still lived in our home that we grew up in, wanted to retire, he made the home available to me at a discounted rate. So that's what made it possible for me to come back to my home as well. The term affordable housing is, there are a lot of different definitions. There are a lot of different options in terms of affordable housing. Some of them have already been mentioned tonight. BMR units are thought of as affordable housing. 100% affordable housing developments like the Veranda, ADUs, first-time homebuyer programs, shared housings, rooms. But unfortunately, that also includes deteriorated older market rate homes where overcrowding often exists, and those are not great options, but really prevalent today in our economy. In our case, with Charities Housing, we choose to focus on the lowest end of the affordability spectrum. So those are people from homeless up to families and individuals who earn about 50% of area median income. But a lot of developers in the BMR programs and a lot of others serve people at up to 120% of area median income. So when you think about affordable housing, there's not one size that fits all. Affordable housing is developed in many ways just like market rate housing. I mean, we go out, we look for sites in communities that where we can build housing. We purchase land. We can complete the entitlement process where we go through the hurdles to get permission to build. We arrange for financing, and then we build our developments. But what makes affordable housing different from market rate developers is that when we're selecting sites, we look for places that are in close proximity to services that people need, because often our folks don't have cars and they need to rely on public transportation, or we want them to be close to schools, we want them to be close to hospitals and medical facilities and places where they can become part of the community without having to have transportation, because that's always a challenge. The other big difference with affordable housing is how we finance it. Using the veranda as an example, that's a 19-unit affordable housing development located on Stevens Creek Boulevard, right across from Main Street. It serves seniors 62 and over, and the folks that live there earn between $10,000 a year and about $40,000 a year. And the way we make that affordable is to cobble together multiple financing sources to make it happen. It's the veranda was about a $12 million development, and we have approximately 10 different financing sources in that. So affordable developers are scrambling to put together financing which is necessary in order to charge the very affordable rents that we do. I think, does that cover it? I don't want to drone on too long. You should give me the hook if I'm talking too much, please.
Alyssa would give you the hook, except she has to unmute herself.
Oh my gosh.
There you go.
I appreciate your watchful eye, Dolly. It's always very appreciated. And as a follow-up to this question, thank you so much for really diving into the multitude of different factors that impact affordable housing development. And as a follow-up, what are some of those barriers, aside from the ones that we've kind of already gone over, for housing developers, especially smaller developers who may not have as much of the initial money? And more to the point, what policies do you believe that the city could revisit to make the process less expensive and time intensive to really push forward these different projects that are very important to our community?
There are 3 or 4 really key policy changes or policies that could be implemented that would really assist in affordable housing development. And land is one of the biggest obstacles that we have to building affordable housing. It's extremely expensive. We compete with for-profit developers for it who can pay a lot more than we can. And so if cities could make sites available, either they purchase them themselves or the city already owns them, and they could be designated for affordable housing, that would be great. We even can do some really creative things like build over parking lots. So there's a big city parking lot that exists, and without losing the parking, there are ways to repurpose that space. Obviously, money, finding resources and dedicating them for affordable housing is important, including levying impact fees on other types of development to generate affordable housing funds. We know, Nexus studies have shown over and over again that by building other types of development, the need for housing increases. Changing land use designations, general plan, and zoning laws so that we can build at higher densities and it's more affordable. And I think the last one would be to educate the community, continue to educate the community about the need for affordable housing and build consensus, because so much time is lost in processes and that slow down building affordable housing and generate a lot of concern in the community, which I think could be eliminated if we had some great leadership.
Thank you very much for that very thorough and informative answer. Dolly, would you like to go for the next question?
You know it. We've had some great leadership. We have Rod Sinks from the Cupertino City Council and Otto Lee from the Sunnyvale City Council. Both have served as council members and mayors. Gentlemen, Kathy just laid out a number of policy issues she thinks cities can take advantage of. And so I'm hoping you might be able to extrapolate on those. Maybe not address what you have done, but what you see is combine that with how you see this going forward in the future. I grew up in Sunnyvale, so Otto, I'm going to start with you. But you two need to unmute your mic if you want us to hear what you're saying.
My video is muted and I can't get that going yet. So it says,
all right, we'll come back to you. That's why I waited for a second. Right. So go ahead, Otto.
Sure. Hi, good evening, Dolly. Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful program. Yeah, my name is Otto Lee, formerly on the Sunnyvale Council, and served briefly as the mayor as well. Currently also the candidate for county supervisor. Hope to succeed Supervisor Dave Cortese, who we've heard from the beginning. Just like you said, Dolly, Dave's been a real champion for affordable housing, and it's something that is really, really important for our area. And sometimes I think people get the message mixed up regarding affordable housing and homeless problems. They are certainly very much interrelated, but those are really two separate issues. I wanted to make that point clear because sometimes I think people get those words mixed up. And sometimes when you have the wrong wording, it gets people very excited. What I mean by that is I really like the term unhoused because it really is much better to describe the problem we have than because when you use the word homeless, it has all these stigma that goes along with it, right? And at the same time, when as earlier said, as Kathy said, when you use the term affordable housing or high density housing, people are like, oh my God, you're gonna build these projects like Chicago and concrete buildings and in our neighborhoods. Like, no, high density housing can be extremely beautiful with lots of open space, right? It really is a misunderstanding of these terms. And sometimes I think there's the education. We all understand smart growth, how important it is to build higher density where there's transportation corridors and all that. But at the same time, there's these unfortunate misunderstanding people have. And the idea of NIMBYism is very real, right? It's like people says, I don't want those tiny homes by my homes because that brings homeless and crimes and whatnot, right? And everybody understands the term NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And I want to introduce another term that some people might have heard of. It's called banana. You know what that means? Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything near anybody. I mean, it's funny, but not funny, right? Because of the fact that, obviously our region needs housing very badly. Ideas like ALU, the accessory living unit, is really long overdue. And that's one thing in terms of comparison to, like, say, Cupertino and Sunnyvale. I think Sunnyvale has been quite progressive, like San Jose, that we are much more amenable of coming with these ideas to add more housing units very quickly. Because obviously one of the issues we have in our cities now is really infill housing, right? Because there's not that much more land left. I mean, the last piece of land left in Sunnyvale that was developed up here was the Corn Palace. That was the last 10 acres that actually have just been approved to build 53 housing units. 2 stories, pretty large units. And personally, I would think that's actually right by Lawrence Expressway. They probably could build a little high density instead of single family homes, but obviously the math worked out for them that way. But my point is that really it's going to be infill housing unit. That's what we're looking for. And in order to make sure, we really need to look forward to educate folks how important getting folks here to live, because you know, how many people can afford these $1.5–2 million single family homes, right? It doesn't make sense. And
Not Genevieve, nor Neil,
Or Alyssa.
nor Justin, nor Alyssa.
Exactly. And then when it comes to housing units, as we all know, when the most expensive cost of development, not the material, is not even the labor, it's the land, right? That's really the issue. And I think that's why regionally, it's not really something that's just a city-to-city approach. It really is a regional approach that we need to work together to make it happen. And you know, for this being a Cupertino focused topic tonight, I mean, I would say one thing that, you know, Cupertino is a wonderful city. It's got one of the best school districts with all those great scores on the schools. And of course, that also attracts a lot of families who wants the kids to excel. And of course, with that also brings up the higher property prices. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, right? That's what we have.
Wholeheartedly agree, Otto. Thank you. I'm going to turn this question over to Rod in terms of what can local city councils do and should do to bring affordability back to our cities.
Thank you. You know, there have been a lot of myths floating around town the last few years. The first is that our schools are overcrowded. Just look at all those portable classrooms. We should save our schools by blocking housing, right? And, you know, the second one is, well, the school demographer, not sure we trust him. And, you know, any downward blip in enrollment is really not a trend. I think the data is now in to dispel that myth. The third is we have great schools that enhance our property values. Certainly true. What's the problem anyway? Building more housing will simply dilute the pool and bring down our property values. Well, you know, as discussed earlier, CUSD is funded in proportion to the number of students. And we have a community in Cupertino, not unlike our neighbors, that's aging in place. There's little increase in the housing stock, while we have a serious ongoing decline in enrollment. And a substantial fraction of our school employees, really very substantial, are retiring or leaving because they can't afford to be here. And recruiting new and younger employees is really tough because by and large, they are saying, and they're voting with their feet, they can't stand a commute from where they can afford to live. So the most significant levers we have to help our schools are, first of all, to build more housing at all income levels. And secondly, to work regionally to bring effective public transportation to Cupertino. So people like many teachers who can't afford to live here can teach here. It's really vital that we do this. And it's certainly the case that those of us who own homes, we do enjoy a premium based on our high quality schools. You can look at the differential versus San Jose, even Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, right? We do, but largely I believe that's based on our high quality schools. If we take that for granted, and if we can't house the next generation of those who educate our kids, I'm afraid we will lose property value, not gain. Now, as regards Valco, in 2018, we worked with the community over the course of a year. It was a very robust program, $3 million. And we said, okay, we know that FUHSD could really use an adult education center. So we put that in the plan. We had a performing arts center. We had a lot of other benefits. 2,923 housing units at all income levels were entitled by that project, including moderate income housing, which is suitable for teachers. Unfortunately, right, the new council said, yeah, well, referendum, not so fast. We're not going to let the community vote on this as they had promised. I had hoped that given the referendum, we would have seen a November 2020 ballot measure to ask our voters if they preferred this over the SB 35 plan, which is entitled under state law with no discretion whatsoever by the city, no input. The good news about the SB 35 plan is, and that's what my backdrop is showing here, is while it's somewhat less housing, 2402 new homes, fully half of that housing must be available under the law to low and very low income households. The best gift we could give to CUSD is not a one-time payment of funds, which was also part of the specific plan. The best gift we could give to CUSD would be an ongoing increase in enrollment, because funded proportionally, having cut back as much as they could, I was impressed by that, the overhead number that Oriane quoted, the 5%. You know, at some point, if your enrollment goes down, you have the same number of dollars to cover the same fixed costs that just won't go away. It's stubborn like that. So that's the power the city has. It's one, to build more housing, and two, you know, we have to work with our neighbors regionally to build effective public transportation here. And those two things are really what we are, the tools at our disposal. In the next cycle for housing coming up, we will not be looking at a number of 1,400 that we will have to allocate around the city to get to a goal of 1,000 units. No, it looks like we're going to be looking at something like 4,000 to 5,000 units of housing. That will be a mandate from the state, effectively. And we need people who know how to accommodate that growth on the city council in 2020 and beyond. Failing that, just saying we're going to stand and fight is not a winning strategy in my view. Right? We'll get better projects if we understand the forcing functions and we respond accordingly.
Yeah.
Thanks. And in fact, on that note, Alyssa, you're taking the state.
Yeah, thank you, Rod, for really teeing up the next section of this question. Evan, Assemblyman Lowe, this question is for you, same question, but how does this look like on the state level in regards to the policy implications of more affordable housing, especially as it relates to working with local governments?
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a little sideways though.
Oh, how about now?
There you go.
Okay, my apologies. I can only have a brief moment, but I'm just joined by Republican legislator, Senator Ling Chang. And we are here because we have a $54 billion, Senator, let me just move here. We have a $54 billion deficit. And so, as you can imagine, being able to work across the aisle is very important. And so I'm trying to get her support on something. But in any case, it's good to see all of you. I miss all of you. I was been on the call ever since the beginning. I thought I was going to be on the second panel, which was the youth panel, but I aged out of that. But the first panel was absolutely amazing to see such strong, dynamic women in these leadership positions for our community, and to hear about Dolly being born and raised and a product of the school district. It's very reminiscent of my own experience as a graduate of Los Alamitos, Bret Harte Leland High School at San Jose Unified, and then De Anza Community College and San Jose State. So homeboy all the way through. Enough with that though. The challenges are very real with respect to helping support our communities. And as you recall, over a period of time, it was such that the city of Cupertino and many cities in our region said this to the state of California, just do us no harm. We eliminated redevelopment and did significant budget cuts. And during that period of time subsequent to that, we were able to get tax equity allocation and revenues specifically for transportation. Unfortunately, just now, just given the current dynamics we are in, just think about this. January 2020, we started with close to $8 billion in the surplus with close to $20 billion in a rainy day fund, whereas now 5 months later, we have $54 billion in cuts. But I've been in conversation with a number of you about ensuring that we can address these issues through the budgetary process with much of the focus on protecting people and supporting the issues that we care about. But similarly, to echo those comments as relates to the conversation about not being able to live in our own communities, I said that in the speech on the floor here in the state legislature, to which I can't afford to live in the community that I grew up in the city of Campbell. I live with my brother. He's a police officer in San Jose. We live in a 1,000-square-foot condo in Campbell, but we won't ever be able to afford, even though mom says, okay, you boys need to start moving out and having your own lives. But I said, Mom, where am I supposed to live? I can't afford to live in this community. So know that it will be continuing to be a champion of these issues. And a number of you have been great advocates in ensuring that the voices are adequately represented in Sacramento. So a call to action, if you will. We need to pass the state budget constitutionally by June 15th. And what would be most helpful is if you help engage with our offices, whether it be Patrick, Aaron's, or writing letters to the editor and talking about, please, here are the things that we need the most. It is to build that public support because as our president of our Cupertino School Board mentioned, there was a opportunity to pass revenue measures to the electorate in Cupertino, which failed. And so understanding that, then are we to say and conclude that residents of the Cupertino School District are okay with a 6th year of cut, not getting additional funding, additional state cuts, and what that would entail. So let's make sure that we invest in the correct fashion. I'm here when I normally should be at home, but we need to focus on the type of fiscal prudent nature of what's going on, and also, frankly, look at the revenue measures. And so that's why I'm talking to our Republican colleague here to try and advocate that she looks at the revenue side, not just on the cut side, but the revenue side, that we can look for additional revenues where possible.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And I think our next question for you, Evan, really gets to the heart of your last comment there and the need to go ahead and balance competing interests. So we hear a lot, especially in Cupertino, about their concern for local control over planning decisions, and you and other advocates have to balance those concerns against the state's desire to address the housing crisis. So more to the point, how do we really reconcile these two competing concerns, and is there a way to address these concerns that are mutually beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, I take no bones about it. Sometimes I say things that are not politically popular, but I think it's the right thing, which is, as you know, the city of Cupertino and the residents did not want, the majority of those who voted did not want the development at the Valco project. And it took state action to say that, let us ensure that we have thoughtful development, smart growth in specific areas. We will continue to expand on that, but that is what I think is very important for us to take a larger approach. Of course, I also find myself in a very, sometimes very difficult situation to which I represent San Jose, but also the small West Valley cities. And what works in San Jose might not work well in Montserrano, Saratoga, or Los Gatos for that matter, and or Cupertino. So it is a balancing approach, and but we try to look at it at a wider angle. But just know that these issues that we hear in Cupertino are not just in our areas. In fact, a number of other cities, smaller cities, predominantly in Orange County, are actually suing the state as well and finding that balance and trying to figure out that they're maintaining that local control. But it is difficult. And finally, let me just say that we need to make sure that the voices win out, so that when there's an item before the council, that the voices are balanced. And forget about next door. We need to ensure that we have strong support and create an environment where we see the courage of our conviction. I see Councilmember Sinks laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. Whether or not at next door they talk about recalling you or recalling me, let's just make sure that we create a balanced environment and speak on the specific policy measures and get beyond just the rhetoric that exists.
It's vital that we have people show up and speak out. Even if you think your comments are falling on deaf ears, it does build momentum. Advocates get together and organize, and it's vital, especially this year, an election year.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, everyone. Let me, if you'll allow me to go back to trying to talk to my colleague here as we're trying to work
Please
on the
do.
state budget. But it's great to see everyone. I miss seeing all of you. I hope you're all safe and see you very soon.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you, Evan.
Okay, thank you, Evan. It was really wonderful to serve with you, alongside you, and also, I don't know, go to Harvard together. So I'll pass on that, though, for the moment. Rod, I'd like you to follow up a little bit on this because, you know, we've got this SB 35 project. I'm trying to look at the question in the chat here. Let me just find it rather quickly, if you don't mind. How do we align future housing design with Cupertino's stated goal of improving public transit and reducing reliance on driving, as well as balancing that with SB 35 and trying to provide affordable housing?
Well, you know, I think that whoever's on the next council is going to be really challenged to look at 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 units, right? Placing that many in our city will be a big challenge. And I think that, you know, people have gotten fed up with the traffic. Everybody's frustrated by it. Well, not now, but it'll come back. And it's said that, you know, we may lose transit ridership to single occupancy vehicles. And if that happens, we'll be in a Carmageddon, right? So there will be competing forces, but I think the best thing for us to do is to keep our eye on the long term, to find places for what are called PDAs. So we've had that discussion, priority development areas. Recognize that in our community, De Anza College is a major transit a facility that, you know, between students and faculty needs to be serviced better, which is why we've been fighting for transit in the 85 corridor, as well as transit in the 280 or Stevens Creek corridor. We simply need to do better to improve the quality of life of our residents. So long term, we need that transit to happen. And we need to look at every opportunity to build more housing. And yes, we have, actually, you know, some people say we don't have enough land. We have plenty of land. We just have to be willing to go up.
Thank you. And that's what I think we're all striving for, is to go up. So, and I'm glad you explained what PDA stood for, because I thought that was personal display of affection, frankly. But thanks very much for that. Even I learned something tonight. And I used to be in acronym city. So
Yeah.
I think at this point, we'd like to thank our panelists for being so involved, and our audience for just being fantastic. And you are loading up the chat, and somehow, and I'm not exactly quite sure how, because I'm the moderator and not the chat person, but somehow we're taking questions in the chat. Is that right, Alyssa?
I believe so.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Or
yes.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna
only if that's Neil we can hear you.
What we're gonna do now is we're gonna open up the chat, and we're gonna have some guiding questions that we're gonna pull up on the screen. It's the last slide, and pretty much those questions are just your name, why you're here, and then any of these three questions, or a question that you might have, or an answer that you might have to another question. So it's pretty much just an opportunity to reflect on what we talked about. We're also gonna, whichever panelists are still here, will have an opportunity to chime in as well. And then I will just be reading out loud the chat. So Kriti, or whomever is in charge of that, do you think that you could open the chat now? And we're just gonna let folks say whatever they'd like in the chat. Please be respectful. Don't say anything that's rude. Yeah, and can you just let me know when you've done that, so you know what to expect?
Okay, and Neil, just before we take that chat, Otto, did you have one more item you wanted to mention? It looked like you got sort of excited about saying something just before we went to the chat discussion.
No, it's I think the format is great, and I'm happy to chime in if anything I can add to the discussion. Thank you, Dolly.
Great, thank you.
While folks put stuff into the chat, we have a couple questions that we wanted to get back to. So I'm gonna hand it off to JR for that.
Okay, so we had a number of really good questions earlier, and I'm trying to condense some of them so that they can be addressed kind of at once. One of them is essentially asking about, what the impact of things like the Falco SB 35 project would be on school enrollment issues, especially given the length of time that project will take to build. So I'll let anybody who wants to try to take a stab at that go first, and then I'll have a follow-up on that.
Well, it will take a while to build, and so it'll take time. But we can't finish what we don't start. So I'm hoping that there is not an appeal. I hope the community will let the project move forward, and it really, 2,400 housing units is really the most significant thing we could do for our schools. And yeah, I recognize that it'll take time.
I'm happy to weigh in a little bit. We did an analysis of most of the projects that have been suggested at Valco and didn't see that there would be an adverse effect to schools. As you heard tonight, it would be helpful to CUSD, but we're not seeing it as an overwhelming issue for high school, partially because many of the units were going to be smaller. And as students get older, it's less likely that families will live in smaller quarters. Obviously, that might change over time, but we've been analyzing this for many years now. I don't know how many years we've really been looking at the Valco project, but it's a long time. And every iteration we've had hasn't had any adverse effect for the high school, and I do think it would be beneficial for elementary.
Do you have any follow-up on that, Lori?
I would say that everything that's been presented in our board meetings has been exactly what Polly's describing, that, we are already, slated to lose more students just from our declining enrollment than in total, that, any of the projections, I think, that have come out, there are a couple of different student generation rates that float around out there, but, that even using, whether or not you use the conservative or the more generous student generation rates, it's still a fewer number of students than what we have lost to date and what we will lose over the next 5 years, and especially with the length of time associated with building projects. It wouldn't have an impact on our ability to be able to continue to provide high quality education.
So in following up on that then, as you're aware, the state requires all local governments to plan for new housing commensurate with their need. And we are at the early stages of the next planning cycle for them. And based upon what the Association of Bay Area Governments is projecting, it looks like Cupertino is going to get an allocation of something on the order of at least about 4,000 units all the way up to 6,500 units. Where would you think that those sorts of units would be best placed in the city in order to help your schools? And that one's primarily for Lori, and if it wasn't obvious.
So actually, I wouldn't presume to say where any of our 6 cities should locate housing. I do think that, in general, the way the state law works would be that when new students are generated, our job is to really to look at organizing ourselves to be able to meet that need. That's not to say that there aren't costs associated with new students coming in. And so, I think that's why having robust conversations between staff and city staff and school district staff and being very open with the communication along all of the planning that's going on is essential. But I don't know that, the school district really wouldn't have I wouldn't be able to offer you a prescription for where housing should go.
Do you have any thoughts, Polly?
I think they should go where they fit from the city's perspective that makes the most sense, and from transportation and all the other aspects. I'm with Lori. The kids come and we hug them up, and well, not now, but in general, and want them as part of our school district.
From my perspective, you know, these areas in Cupertino that we've identified as PDAs previously, we ought to be thinking about how we increase those, and we ought to be thinking about to attract transit dollars, among other things. We also ought to be considering that area that we call the heart of the city, right, as prime for taking the taller buildings that we're going to need to come up with 5,000 or 6,000. And you know, we ought to be proactive in figuring out how to welcome that and deal with it gracefully rather than fighting, because fighting in the end will just get projects that we have no control over. There was a question in the chat about what we do about, from Richard Mellinger, about what we do about single family enclaves. Minneapolis dealt with that. My guess is it could be enabled most effectively by state legislation, but in the Minneapolis area where I grew up, they approved an overlay to allow multifamily units, I think up to 3 on single family home lots. That's not going to radically transform the face of the city in a decade or two, but over time it could also, I think, make a real difference.
We have a question here that I actually would like to direct towards Otto, if you would, just because I feel like it's a good fit in differentiating some of the decisions that Sunnyvale has made as compared to Cupertino. And the question is basically, how do you see student generation rates changing from the development of multifamily housing units? Given, I'm applying it to Sunnyvale because Sunnyvale has been building a lot of multifamily housing, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do think that the multi units like townhomes and condominiums do bring in families and certainly more student enrollments, because you certainly have more number of units per acre at the end of the day, right? So as much as there are single individuals who is moving in with no kids, it's also quite a number that I think in terms of school enrollment decline, I don't think we see it as great an effect as we see in Cupertino and we do in Sunnyvale, which I think is in that sense fortunate in some sense, but at the same time I think the bottom line really is that the way I think the way Sunnyvale, I want to just say something to cheer up how Sunnyvale planning has done is we have this one-stop planning desk where it makes it far easier for folks to come through to get things approved. And I think it does help in terms of, especially in the development community. They like doing business in Sunnyvale, having that reputation of somewhere that we are very supportive of getting things through in a much more smoother fashion. Obviously with community, oppositions and all that, that's one big issue. But at the same time, by having a less red tape at the government level, of course, certainly helps getting, whether it's...
Otto, can I interrupt you for a moment? I'm getting a lot of feedback that you're a little quiet. I don't know if maybe there's something wrong with the mic.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll try to speak a little closer. Is this a little bit better there?
Yes.
That's much better.
Sorry, yeah, okay, I'll speak louder. So the one good thing I was saying about Sunnyvale is that the one-stop center that we have in terms of our planning department really helps move things a lot smoother. And the development community has been very favorable and supportive of what we are able to do. And that's something I think Sunnyvale has been very proud of. And then also in terms of the housing, I think the planning folks and also our business development group all has been very much encouraging developers coming into Sunnyvale to look in the bigger sense to work together with the neighbors very, very early on. And as you know, when it comes to neighborhood support, a lot of times it's just that they don't know, right? I mean, I want to use kind of an extreme example. When Jet York was trying to build the stadium, right, that whole project in Santa Clara, he was hosting 8 to 12 people type get together in people's backyard or house practically every night, every other night in the city of Santa Clara. I mean, it's just amazing the type of outreach. I'm not saying every developer needs to necessarily do that, but it's the type of communications that they were able to put together to get support from the neighborhoods, from the city. And that type of outreach is, I think, is a good example of how sometimes when we are making change to community, making people feel that, you know, the fear, right? Try to alleviate their fear sometimes is even more important than anything else you could do.
I actually think making people feel included and active is really good. And so for starters, I'd like to thank Neil, who really sort of was the brainstorm behind this whole evening. Thank you, Neil, for making me as a moderator and all the panelists feel included in how to kind of guide our educational and housing affordability future. So I'm sure if you could hear everybody right now, they'd all be giving you a little round of applause. We know there were a number of questions. Thank you, people. We know there are a number of questions in the chat that have yet to be answered. We also have been recording this evening, and I'm sure Neil will tell us how this is going to be promoted, because honestly, I'm just the moderator. The tech stuff I don't do. But if any of our panelists have a last minute dying statement they have to make, because you've hung in there with us for a couple of hours, we'll do that. But in respect to the time that we told people we'd end tonight, I think that we're getting close to that time. So anybody out there that needs to chime in with something? Okay, so
I do want to give everyone the opportunity to do that if you'd like to.
that sounded to me underwater. Do you want to give everybody the opportunity to say one last piece? I'm going to let people decide if they want to do that. But Neil, before they do that, can you please tell us where does this recording go and how people can stay involved with Cupertino for All? And are we going to have more forums like this that were widely successful? We had 100 participants, and that is excluding panelists. So cheers to a really good night, people.
First of all, thank you all so much for joining us. The turnout was amazing, and you stuck around with us for now 2 hours, so it means a lot. And I think to me that just shows that our community is ready to have this discussion that is so important, and that we're ready to reimagine what our community could look like. One that is more inclusive, one that recognizes everyone, even those on the margins, you know, one that recognizes De Anza college students who are daytime residents, or maybe that tech worker who can't make rent in Cupertino and so lives in Sunnyvale or Mountain View, or, you know, a houseless person that is living at an encampment by 280. And to answer your question, I would very much like to do more of these. Maybe I could get like a quick, if anybody wants to just say in the chat, some kind of reaction like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yes, I would like more of these. No pressure on the audience though. And I would very much like to thank our panelists for sticking around for so long. I know this has been a large panel, a little bit unorthodox, but I'm glad that it all worked out. And if you would like to get more involved, first of all, follow us on our social media, like our Facebook page. We have a Twitter as well. And we will be emailing everybody who attended to send the recording and also give you some next steps if you're interested in getting more involved and staying connected. We also have a website, cupertinoforall.org. So those would be the 3 ways I'd recommend first. Social media, our website, and then staying in touch for a follow-up email with the recording, as well as some more information. I'll also provide the panelists' contact information too in that email. So if you have any follow-up questions for any of these folks, sorry to our panelists if you get a barrage of questions. I will be providing that in case you want to do some follow-ups. But other than that, I just want to close it out by saying that I think we have a really great opportunity here. And I mean, things really, I don't think have ever been this bad in recent memory. We have a pandemic, and we're already having issues with enrollment and housing. And so I think now more than ever, we really do need all of us to come together and reimagine what we want our city and our region to look like. And so on that note, thank you all again so much for joining. And that's all I got. So I hope you all have a good night.
And I think the last person we want to thank also is SV at Home, who hosted tonight's meeting and made
Certainly.
our video work and provided us an opportunity to connect with all of you out there. So SV at Home, my hats are off to you, or my hat, well, if I wear hats, but thank you very much for hosting.
Fantastic. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.